think history will be pretty clear that the decision not to have any troops there after January 1st, 2012, was a very serious strategic mistake that the president made. A lot of words from him aren't going to change history's judgment.
All right, that's Paul Bremer with us on this show yesterday, folks. And joining us now, I'm very happy to say, is my friend Andy McCarthy, former federal prosecutor and, of course, New York Times best-selling author, columnist, and senior fellow at National Review. And his book, Faithless Execution, building the case for building the political case for Obama's impeachment. Congratulations on the book, Andy, and great to talk to you.
Steve, great to talk to you, and thanks very much about the book. I appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. We put it up there on the screen. Folks could see it. Let me ask you about Bremer's comments, and I asked Bremer, the reason he said what he said, that history will show that Obama made a big mistake, is because Obama's running away from this whole thing. He's claiming he didn't bring the troops home. He didn't end the war. He didn't, want to leave no troops in Iraq. When all he's done for the past, from the time he started campaigning, was he was going to do it, and after it was done, he was bragging about the fact that he did it.
Yeah, I think two things have to get sorted out, Steve. Number one, the last point you made is absolutely spot on. Obama's been, to say duplicitous about in his most recent comments about this doesn't really do it justice, because in many ways his presidency, and in particular I would say his acquisition of the Democratic nomination, where his distinguishing feature, that is the thing he used to distinguish himself between himself and Hillary Clinton, was the fact that he had not voted in favor of authorizing the war in Iraq. Of course, he wasn't in Congress at the time, so he didn't have the opportunity. It was very convenient for him to say that. And also that that vote was a dumb vote. It was an authorization of a war that was a terrible mistake. And his commitment from the time he was a candidate was that he would end the war. And he's many times tried to take credit for, quote unquote, ending the war, as if, when you leave the battlefield while the enemy is still targeting Americans and frankly targeting everyone else, that's somehow winning as opposed to abandoning the job. But I think for him to come out and say, gee whiz, this wasn't my decision, is absolutely appalling. And I say that as somebody who has said, you can't blame Obama for the fact that Bush entered a status of forces agreement that called for American troops to leave. What was it in 2011? I think, if I'm remembering right. So I don't think you can blame Obama for the deal that Bush cut. Although I think there's a good argument that when Obama was a candidate, he actually undercut Bush in that regard. But putting that part of it aside, Obama was commander-in-chief when we left Iraq. He's the one who chose to leave Iraq, and it's on his watch that we did it. It's under his command that we did it. I don't think that cures the problem that we have never had an accurate strategic vision for this war, and that the war could never have been won in Iraq because the enemy is a global enemy that doesn't limit itself by national boundaries.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and you and I have been talking about that enemy for quite some time. Should we take heart that, I don't know, that it took this situation in Iraq for there to be at least an acknowledgement from this administration, albeit a very small one, and now coverage from the media? I loved it last week. Breaking news, Christians in Iraq being persecuted, as if that hasn't been happening there and all over the Middle East and all over parts of Africa for years. But nonetheless, should we take heart that this has finally come to the fore in the media, and it's crossed the lips of the president?
Well, look, anything that shines a light on the atrocities that are going on there, and as you point out, have been going on there for many years, is welcome. I really don't take heart, for the most part, Steve, for the coverage right now, because it seems to me that it's an encapsulation of everything that's been wrong all this time. And mainly that is to say, I keep hearing the president say, and I keep hearing even people on the other side of the aisle saying, Um, Iraq's problems can't be fixed militarily. A diplomatic solution is required, and what we really need to do is try to get the Iraqis to pull together and settle their differences. I think I speak for most people in the United States when I say I couldn't care less about political stability in Iraq. What I've worried about all along is that the national security interests of the United States have been made subordinate to things like political reconciliation in Iraq and in Afghanistan and here, there, and everywhere, in this great experiment in Islamic democratization. The fact is, what we have now is an anti-American enemy who now has a greater ability to plot and to train than the precursor version of the Islamic State, which is Al Qaeda, had in 1995 through 2001 when they hit the United States, both our homeland and interests throughout the world, again and again and again. And the problem in Iraq, and the reason in my mind that we went to Iraq in the first place, was not to achieve Iraqi stability and political reconciliation. It was to take out a regime that was a state sponsor of anti-American terrorism and to make sure that Al Qaeda couldn't have safe haven there. And now we're in a situation where that's frankly even worse than it was prior to 9/11.
No, you couldn't be more right. Absolutely. That morphed into democracy for Iraq, which I don't think, as you said, and I think you're right on. Most Americans overwhelmingly couldn't care less if there's democracy in Iraq, couldn't care less under Bush either, just wanted to make sure that Saddam Hussein didn't have those weapons, couldn't threaten us, and as you said, Al Qaeda couldn't get their hands on them or coalesce from there and
Right.
And plan attacks against us. So now I see that the U.S. officials, there's a report that they have not ruled out ground troops to help evacuate some of the persecuted minorities from Iraq. Where do you think? Where do you think this is headed? I mean, they keep hearing mission creep, mission creep, mission creep.
Well, I'm not as concerned about mission creep here, Steve, as I am about getting the mission right in the first place. I feel obviously terrible for the Christians who are being routed by Islamic supremacists in Iraq, just like they're being routed by Islamic supremacists in a variety of other places. I also obviously have concern for American officials in Erbil and wherever they work on the planet. In fact, I think I'm a lot more concerned about them in places like Benghazi, where they shouldn't have been in the first place, than this administration has been. But that all said, the mission here really shouldn't be any different than it was in the days following 9/11, which is that we have a transcontinental, anti-American, highly capable, highly lethal, growing jihadist state that has to be conquered and destroyed. And frankly, I know this is going to be called warmongering, but the fact is they're already at war with us. We can either put our head in the sand about that or not. But eventually, we are going to have to defeat them. And you can't defeat them from 10,000 feet in the air. And it can't be delegated to the incompetent Iraqi army or the Afghan security forces or whoever else we want to talk about delegating it to. The only force in the world that has real capability to defeat this enemy is the United States Armed Forces and our real allies. And not these allies that we're trying to cultivate in the new Sharia democracies. I'm talking about the alliances of the West, which are the prime targets of this Islamic State. And we can recognize that now, or we can wait till they kill another 3 or 5 or 10,000 Americans. But eventually, it's going to have to happen.
No, you're absolutely right, and this is a stronger threat and a more dangerous threat than Al Qaeda was, directly to our homeland, as indicated by everybody I've heard from, everybody from Congressman King to Dianne Feinstein. And we know the passports and that these Westerners have that are fighting for ISIS to come back into Europe and come into the United States. We can't keep track of them for the most part. Some of them could be here already. So it is very, very frightening. And this might be the the battle of our time that we are going to have to wage for our very survival. Andy, great to talk to you. To be continued. And of course, folks, the book Faithless Execution. Check it out. Andy's latest bestseller. And Andy McCarthy, always great to talk to you, my friend. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you. All right, folks. Very, very, very frightening prospect, you know, especially when you have a 14-year-old son, soon to be 15 years old. But this is not a laughing matter. This is not neocons, you know, banging the drums for war, the industrial complex, you know. This is not any of that. This is our survival. This is a terrorist group that said we're going to plant a flag at the White House. And if we let them, they will. Give Me 5 is next. Don't go away.